1:53 in the morning, November 1st, 1943. 49 degrees north, 31 degrees west. The North Atlantic in a Force 9 gale. In the Combat Information Center of the United States destroyer Borie, a radar operator watched his scope fade into sea clutter at 2,800 yards. The contact was still there, somewhere in the heaving darkness. A U-boat trying to crash dive. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Charles H. Hutchins gripped the rail as his 24-year-old ship surged forward at 25 knots. Back in Washington, staff analysts had charted the new reality. After Black May 1943, U-boat losses exceeded replacements. Commanders in Brest expected their boats to slip through the mid-ocean gap as they always had. Instead, escort carrier hunter-killer groups now prowled those same waters. Within the hour, Borie and U-405 would lock together in a configuration neither Navy had designed for. A fight decided by rifle fire at arm's length. By late May 1943, an analyst in the Admiralty's submarine tracking room could see it clearly. The curve on the graph had crossed. Merchant ship losses were falling. U-boat kills were climbing. The chart, spread across a staff table in London, told a story that would reshape the entire war at sea. Black May, that's what the German submariners called it. In a single month, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats in the Atlantic. 41. The rate was unsustainable, and Großadmiral Karl Donitz, commander of the Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, BDU for short, knew it. He had started the war with fewer than 60 operational boats. Now, even with Type 7 and Type 9 production running at capacity, losses outpaced the yards. A single Type 7C required hundreds of thousands of man-hours to build. Welding the pressure hull sections, installing the diesel and electric motors, fitting the torpedo tubes, training the crew. By autumn 1943, Germany was sinking boats faster than Krupp and Blom and Voss could replace them. The reason was visible on every Allied operations board from Washington to Gibraltar. Technology and tactics had fused into a lethal combination. Centimetric radar, the 10-centimeter wavelength sets that German METOX receivers couldn't detect, allowed Allied aircraft to close on a surfaced U-boat in darkness or fog and drop depth charges before the lookouts even saw the plane. High-frequency direction finding, called Huff-Duff by the sailors, let convoy escorts triangulate a U-boat's position the instant it radioed a contact report. Long-range patrol aircraft, Consolidated PBY Catalinas, Lockheed Hudsons, and the new B-24 Liberators modified for maritime patrol, now covered the mid-Atlantic gap where U-boats had once operated beyond the reach of land-based planes. But the true innovation was the escort carrier. Small, slow, built on merchant hulls, these jeep carriers carried 18 to 24 aircraft and sailed with destroyer escorts in task groups designed for one purpose: hunting submarines. No longer tied to convoy defense, these hunter-killer groups could pursue contacts for days, saturate patrol boxes, and force U-boats to dive and stay down until their batteries died. Task Group 21.14 was one such unit. Centered on the escort carrier USS Card, a Bogue-class flat-top commissioned in November 1942, the group operated in the central Atlantic west of the Azores. Captain Arnold J. Isbell commanded from Card's bridge. His pilots flew Grumman FM-1 Wildcats and Grumman TBF Avengers. Stubby, reliable aircraft that could search for hours on a single load of fuel and carry depth charges, bombs, or rockets. The method was simple and devastatingly effective. Aircraft searched the assigned patrol box in overlapping patterns. When radar or visual contact located a U-boat, the plane would fix its position, drop smoke floats or flares, and orbit while radioing the surface ships. Destroyers would race to the spot, sometimes at 30 knots or more, and prosecute with sonar, depth charges, and gunfire. If the U-boat surfaced to fight or flee, aircraft attacked from astern where the German anti-aircraft guns had limited arcs. If the boat dived, the destroyers pinged and dropped patterns of 300-pound depth charges set to detonate at varying depths. Between July 27th and October 25th, 1943, Task Group 21.14 destroyed 8 U-boats. The tally earned the group a Presidential Unit Citation, the first ever awarded to an escort carrier task force. Among the kills, U-664 on August 9th, U-173 on September 11th, U-Fort 22 on October 24. By late October, BDU's situation maps showed the reality. The patrol areas off the Azores and west of Ireland, once fertile hunting grounds for wolf packs, had become killing zones. Boats departing Brest or St. Nazaire faced a gauntlet. Land-based patrols as they exited the Bay of Biscay, roaming hunter-killer groups in the mid-Atlantic, and convoy escorts that now outnumbered the attackers. The doctrine that had worked from 1940 to early 1943 night surface attacks in mid-ocean, exploiting superior surface speed and the element of surprise, was obsolete. Allied radar saw through the night. Allied aircraft owned the sky. Yet the boats kept sailing. Orders were orders. Fuel was topped off, torpedoes loaded, charts marked with grid squares and rendezvous points. Crews, most of them younger than 25, boarded, cast off lines, and nosed out into the Atlantic. Some returned. Most did not. The balance had tipped. For every Allied merchantman sunk in the second half of 1943, the Kriegsmarine lost a U-boat and 49 trained men. It was not a sustainable trade. The graph line said it all. The Atlantic was no longer Germany's sea. Norfolk, Virginia, July 1943. On Card's flight deck, plane handlers spotted aircraft for the morning launch, 4 FM-1 Wildcats for combat air patrol, 6 TBF Avengers rigged for anti-submarine search. Each Avenger carried 4 325-pound Mark 44 depth bombs in the bomb bay, fused to detonate at 25 feet. Flares, smoke floats, and a radio that could reach the destroyers 50 miles away. The checklist was routine, but the mission was not. Traditional convoy escort tied warships to slow-moving merchantmen, 7 or 8 knots, zigzagging, vulnerable. Hunter-killer groups operated differently. Freed from convoy protection, they could sprint to a contact at flank speed, pursue a wounded U-boat for hours, and operate in weather that grounded land-based aircraft. The doctrine was still being written, refined with each patrol, but the concept was proven. Offense, not defense. Find the U-boats and sink them before they found the convoys. Captain Isbell, a career naval officer who had commanded destroyers in the Pacific before taking Card, understood the math. A single escort carrier cost less to build and operate than the cargo carried by a single large convoy. If Card and her escorts denied a patrol box to an entire wolf pack, say 6 to 10 U-boats, the return on investment was staggering. Every boat forced to dive, every attack interrupted, every torpedo not fired, saved lives and steel. The destroyers in Task Group 21.14 were veteran Atlantic workhorses, USS Borie, Barry, and Gough, all flush-deck four-pipers, from the 1918 to 1921 building programs, modernized for anti-submarine warfare. Older, slower, and less glamorous than the new Fletcher-class destroyers being commissioned in 1943, these Clemson-class ships had been updated with modern sonar, radar, and anti-aircraft guns. Torpedo tubes had been removed or reduced to make space for depth-charge racks and throwers. Crews numbered around 215, most of them reservists trained in the crash programs of 1941 and 42. The method they practiced was relentless. Aircraft searched a rectangular patrol box, typically 100 by 200 miles, flying low, radar sweeping, eyes scanning the swells for the telltale feather of a periscope or the dark shape of a conning tower. Sonobuoys, a new invention, could be dropped to listen for propeller noise. When a contact appeared, the pilot would mark the spot and call the surface group. The destroyers would race in, form a search line, and begin pinging. Sonar operators, headphones clamped tight, listened for the return echo, a metallic ping, bouncing off a steel hull 300 or 400 feet down. Depth charge attacks followed a doctrine refined over 3 years of war. Patterns of 5 to 10 charges, rolled off stern racks or fired from K-gun throwers mounted amidships, bracketed the estimated position of the U-boat. The charges sank at a known rate, detonating at preset depths, 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. The shock wave propagated through water far more efficiently than through air. A near miss could spring hull plates, shatter gauges, kill light bulbs, rupture seals. A direct hit could crack the pressure hull and send the boat down. If the U-boat survived and surfaced, to fight, to flee, or because it had no choice, the destroyers closed with guns. 4-inch deck guns, 3-inch mounts, 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The goal was to hold the pressure hull, disable the diesel engines, kill the deck gunners, and force surrender or scuttling. From July through October, Task Group 21.14 logged dozens of attacks. Many were inconclusive oil slicks, wreckage, but no confirmed kill. Others were definitive. On August 9th, aircraft from CARD located U-664, a Type 7C boat, and guided Borie and Goff to the contact. Depth charges forced the boat up. Gunfire and more charges finished it. 11 survivors were pulled from the sea. 38 men went down with the hull. On October 1st, CARD's aircraft sighted U-460, another Type 7C. The boat dived. The destroyers held contact and attacked for 6 hours. Finally, compressed air and debris exploded to the surface. No survivors. 49 men lost. On October 24th, U-422, yet another Type 7C, was caught on the surface. Avengers attacked with rockets and depth bombs. The submarine returned fire with its 8.8-centimeter deck gun and quad 20mm mounts, damaging one aircraft. But the Wildcats strafed the conning tower, killing the gunners. The boat dived, trailing oil. Borie and Goff prosecuted the sonar contact for 2 hours. When U-422 surfaced, crippled and unable to submerge, the destroyers closed and fired until the hull broke apart. 3 survivors. 46 dead. By October 25th, the tally stood at 8 U-boats destroyed, more than 24 probable and possible kills, and uncounted harassment attacks that forced boats to abort patrols or expend torpedoes defensively. The cost to Task Group 21.14. Minor aircraft losses, superficial damage, no ships sunk. The map on CARD's operations board told the story. Grid squares west of Ireland and the Azores, once swarming with contacts, were now empty. U-boats avoided the area. When they had to transit it, they did so submerged, slowly, conserving battery power, and praying that no Avenger appeared overhead. The Presidential Unit Citation, awarded in early 1944, recognized what the numbers already showed. A single carrier and 3 old destroyers operating as a team could deny the Atlantic to dozens of enemy submarines. The method worked. The U-boats were losing. Boston Navy Yard. May 1943. In a repair dock, a work crew swarmed over the hull of USS Borie, hull number DD-215. She was 24 years old, built in 1919 at the William Cramp and Sons shipyard in Philadelphia. A Clemson-class flush-deck destroyer, 314 feet long, 31 feet abeam, displacing 1,215 tons standard. For boilers, 2 steam turbines, twin screws. Design speed, 35 knots. Actual speed in 1943, after years of salt and sea, 28 knots, maybe 30 on a good day. The modernization log recorded the changes. Original armament, 4 4-inch 50 caliber guns, 1 3-inch 50 caliber anti-aircraft gun, 12 21-inch torpedo tubes, had been revised for anti-submarine work. Torpedo outfit reduced to 1 quadruple mount, freeing weight and deck space. Depth charge capacity increased. 2 stern racks holding 14 charges each, for K-gun throwers amidships. Anti-aircraft guns upgraded. 6 20mm Oerlikon cannons positioned around the superstructure. Radar added. An SC series surface search set. An SG fire control radar. Sonar, the latest QC model, effective to 1,500 yards in good conditions. Crew complement. 10 officers, approximately 205 enlisted. Most were reservists, men who had been civilians in 1941, taught to be sailors in 8 weeks of boot camp and another 8 weeks of specialty school. Signal men, radar men, sonar operators, gunners, engine men, cooks. They came from every state, every background. They learned on the job. Commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Charles H. Hutchins, United States Naval Reserve. Born in 1910, he was 33 years old in May 1943, old by destroyer command standards but young enough to keep the pace. His service record noted initiative, good ship handling, and strict attention to drill. He ran a tight ship, damage control drills every other day. Gunnery practice whenever ammunition could be spared. Small arms training on deck, rifles, Thompson submachine guns, pistols, grenades. In a Navy where most destroyer captains never expected to fight at ranges under 1,000 yards, Hutchins made sure his crew could shoot. Borie's Atlantic career had been eventful. She had escorted convoys to Murmansk in 1942, enduring Arctic gales and Luftwaffe attacks. She had hunted U-boats off Newfoundland, logged depth charge attacks, brought back survivors from torpedoed merchantmen. By mid-1943, her hull was worn, her machinery temperamental, but her crew was experienced. They knew their ship, knew each other, knew the sea. When Task Group 21.14 formed in the summer of 1943, Borie was assigned as one of Card's escorts. The group sortied from Norfolk in late July and began working the mid-Atlantic patrol boxes. The first weeks were quiet, radar contacts that turned out to be whales, sonar returns that were thermal layers or schools of fish. Then came the kills. U-664, U-460, U-173. Borie assisted on some, missed others due to position or fuel state. On the evening of October 31st, while patrolling northwest of the Azores, Borie's radar detected a surface submarine at approximately 9,000 yards. Hutchins increased speed and closed. The contact dived. Borie attacked with depth charges, 2 patterns, 10 charges each, and regained sonar contact. The U-boat, later identified as U-256, evaded and eventually escaped. The action report logged probable damage. It was a typical Atlantic engagement in late 1943. Brief, violent, inconclusive. Hutchins and his crew had done everything by the book. The U-boat had survived, slipped away, but been forced off its patrol. That counted as a win. Within 12 hours, Borie would encounter another U-boat. This time, there would be no escape for either ship. The engineering log for October 31st noted minor deficiencies. Port shaft vibration increasing, likely a propeller blade damaged during the depth charge runs. Fuel state, 60%. Ammunition. Depth charges nearly expended, 20mm ready service lockers 3/4 full, 4-inch magazines adequate. Crew condition. Fatigue building after weeks at sea, but morale high after recent kills. Hutchins reviewed the reports and signed off. He knew his ship was old. He knew that one more patrol, one more storm, one more hard turn at flank speed could open seams that would not close. Destroyers were expendable. Men were not. If Borie's hull gave out, the men would survive. If they stayed sharp, stayed trained, stayed together. At 01:53 on November 1st, a new radar contact appeared. Range, approximately 16,000 yards. Bearing, steady. Speed, slow, consistent with a U-boat on the surface, making transit speed. Hutchins ordered general quarters. Borie turned toward the contact and increased to 25 knots. The fight was about to begin.
Brest, France.
October 5th, 1943. At the submarine pens, massive concrete bunkers built by the organization tote to protect U-boats from Allied bombing, the crew of U-405 made final preparations. Fuel tanks topped 113 cubic meters of diesel, enough for approximately 8,500 nautical miles at cruising speed. Torpedoes loaded, 24 eels, a mix of standard G7A compressed air models and the new electric G7E variants that left no wake. Provisions for 6 weeks. Ammunition for the 8.8-centimeter deck gun and the quad 20mm Flak-Vierling anti-aircraft mount. Captain Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann, 28 years old, stood on the conning tower and watched his crew secure the last items. He had joined the Kriegsmarine in 1936, trained at the Naval Academy at Merwick, and qualified for U-boats in 1940. By 1943, he had survived 4 years of war, countless patrols, and seen too many friends die. U-405 was a Type 7C boat, the backbone of the U-boat arm. 769 tons surfaced, 871 submerged. 67 meters long, 6.2 meters beam, 4.7 meters draft. 2 supercharged 6-cylinder diesels for surface propulsion, producing 3,200 horsepower combined, enough for 17.7 knots on the surface. 2 electric motors for submerged propulsion. 750 horsepower, 7.6 knots underwater. Crush depth. Officially 220 meters. In practice, some boats had survived deeper. The conning tower bristled with equipment. Periscopes, radio antennas, direction-finding loops, the stubby barrel of the 8.8 centimeter gun forward of the tower, the flak-veerling platform aft. Below, the pressure hull was crammed with machinery, torpedoes, bunks, food, and 49 men. Space was so tight that off-watch crewmen slept in hammocks strung above the torpedoes. The air was always thick with diesel fumes, sweat, mildew, and the smell of unwashed bodies. Hopman's orders from BDU were clear but bleak. Proceed to patrol area Alpha November, west of Ireland and north of the Azores. Attack any Allied shipping encountered. Avoid contact with escorts if possible. Use conservative tactics, submerged approaches, electric torpedoes to minimize detection. Surface only at night and only when absolutely necessary. The new Allied radar could detect a conning tower at ranges that made escape impossible. The briefing had not been encouraging. In the 6 months from May to October 1943, the U-boat arm had lost 237 boats, more than one per day. Production could not keep pace. Replacement crews arrived at the training flotillas with less and less sea time, less and less experience. The veterans, the men who had sailed in 1940 and 41, who knew the Atlantic in all its moods, were dead or reassigned. Hopman was one of the survivors. He knew the odds. He also knew his duty. On October 5th at 1400 hours, U-405 slipped her moorings and nosed out of Brest Harbor. She transited the Bay of Biscay submerged, surfacing only at night to recharge batteries and ventilate the hull. Allied patrol aircraft, RAF Coastal Command Sunderlands, Hutchins, and Liberators, swarmed the bay, hunting U-boats as they entered or exited. Dozens of boats had been caught in those shallow waters, bombed, strafed, sunk. U-405 made it through. By mid-October, she was in her assigned patrol box, running submerged during the day, surfacing at night to listen on the hydrophones for convoy propeller noise. Days passed. No contacts. Fuel burned. Battery charge cycled down and back up. The routine of patrol settled in. 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off. Canned food, black bread going stale, water rationed for drinking only. On October 30th, Hopman received a radio signal from BDU. Allied convoy reported in Grid Square Alpha November 7. Course 090, speed 8 knots. Hopman plotted an intercept course and increased speed to 15 knots, running on the surface to close the distance. He never found the convoy. Instead, at approximately 0153 on November 1st, U-405's bridge watch spotted radar pulses on the METOX detector. The alarm sounded. The crew tumbled from bunks and hammocks. The diesel engines roared to full power. Hopman ordered a crash dive. They were too late. The radar contact was already closing fast, a destroyer judging by the speed. Hopman took the boat down to 150 meters and went silent, running on batteries, hoping the attacker would lose contact. Above, USS Borie's sonar pinged. The sound echoed through U-405's hull. A mechanical heartbeat, relentless, closing. Hopman knew what came next. Depth charges. Mid-Atlantic. October 24th, 1943. CARD's operations board showed a dense cluster of contacts. In 48 hours, Task Group 21.14 had encountered and attacked 4 U-boats. 2 were confirmed kills. The others escaped damaged, trailing oil, almost certainly unable to continue their patrols. The pace was exhausting. Flight crews launched before dawn, flew 6-hour patrols, landed, refueled, and launched again. Destroyer crews manned general quarter stations for hours at a time, then stood watches, then returned to action when another contact appeared. Sleep came in snatches. Food was cold sandwiches and coffee. Fuel and ammunition expenditures climbed. On the morning of October 24th, a TBF Avenger from CARD sighted U-422 on the surface at approximately 0830 hours. The pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert P. Schrader, attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth bombs from low altitude. The U-boat dived. Schrader marked the swirl with smoke floats and radioed Borie and Goff. The destroyers arrived 30 minutes later. Sonar contact was solid. Borie attacked first, dropping a 5-charge pattern set for 150 feet. The explosions raised geysers 50 feet high. Goff followed with a 10-charge pattern. Oil and debris surfaced with splinters, clothing, a life jacket. Sonar operators reported breaking up noises, metallic groans, then silence. At 1100 hours, U-422 surfaced stern first, her bow submerged, propellers still turning. The conning tower hatch opened. Men began climbing out. Borie and Goff opened fire. 4-inch shells hit the conning tower and pressure hull. 20-millimeter fire raked the deck. Some crewmen jumped into the sea. Others were cut down by gunfire. The U-boat's stern settled lower. Water poured through the open hatch. At 11:30, the hull slipped under. Borie's crew recovered 3 survivors from the water. 46 men died. The action report noted that U-422 had been on her first war patrol, her first and last. The crew had been green, inexperienced. They had surfaced too soon, opened the hatch too soon, given the destroyer's clear targets. Experienced U-boat commanders knew to stay deep, stay silent, and try to slip away. U-422's captain had not learned that lesson. He paid for it with his life and the lives of his crew. That evening, Borie made radar contact with another surfaced U-boat at approximately 2100 hours. Hutchins increased speed and gave chase. The U-boat dived at 8,000 yards. Borie attacked with depth charges. The explosions echoed across the dark water. Sonar contact faded. Hutchins held position and waited. After 30 minutes, he heard propeller noise on the hydrophones. Slow, fading, moving west. The U-boat, later identified as U-256, had evaded and escaped. Hutchins logged probable damage and returned to station. Crew fatigue was becoming a factor. Engineering logs showed reduced efficiency, slower response times, minor maintenance issues accumulating, more coffee consumed per watch. Gun crews reported worn barrels on the 20-millimeter Oerlikons. The guns had fired thousands of rounds in the past month, and the barrels were overheating, losing accuracy. Depth charge inventories were critically low. Borie had expended nearly all her racks and K-gun loads. Card supply officer radioed that replenishment would be available at the next fueling rendezvous. Still 3 days away. Hutchins knew his ship and crew were operating on the edge. One more contact, one more run, and something would break. Machinery, men, or both. On the night of October 31st to November 1st, Borie was steaming northwest at 15 knots, patrolling the edge of Task Group 21.14's assigned box. Weather was building. Wind 25 knots, seas 10 to 15 feet, barometer falling. A front was moving in from the west. By dawn, the Atlantic would be in full gale. At 01:53, the radar operator in Borie's Combat Information Center called the bridge. Contact, bearing 035, range 16,000 yards. Slow moving, constant bearing. Hutchins acknowledged and ordered the helm over. Borie turned toward the contact and increased to 25 knots. Within 30 minutes, the destroyer was closing fast. The range dropped, 12,000 yards, 10,000, 8,000. The contact held steady, definitely a surfaced U-boat, running on diesels, unaware of Borie's approach. At 02:30, the range was 6,000 yards. Hutchins ordered all guns manned. The 4-inch mounts trained out, crews loading. Ready. On deck, men crouched behind splinter shields, gripping rifles and submachine guns. Below, engineering pushed the turbines to maximum revolutions. Borie surged forward, bow wave rising white in the darkness. At 02:50, the U-boat dived. The radar contact vanished. Borie's sonar operator picked up the echo immediately. Bearing 037, range 2,800 yards, depth estimated at 150 feet. Hutchins ordered the first depth charge run. The fight had begun. 0300 hours. North Atlantic. The gale was at full strength now, wind 40 knots, gusting 50. Seas ran 30 feet, whitecaps breaking everywhere. Visibility, a few hundred yards in the blowing spray. Temperature, 12 degrees Celsius. Water temperature, colder. Borie closed on the submerged U-boat. In the sonar compartment, Soundman Second Class William Shevlin held the contact. Range, 2,000 yards, steady. Bearing 038. Depth, estimated 150 feet, based on the echo return time. The U-boat was running deep, trying to evade. On the bridge, Hutchins conned the ship personally. No time for elaborate fire control solutions. This was knife-fighting range, close, fast, instinctive. He ordered full speed and aimed Borie's bow at the sonar bearing. At 0305, Borie passed over the estimated position. The depth charge crews on the fantail rolled 5 charges off the stern racks, fuses set for 100 feet. The K-gun crews on either side fired 4 more charges, throwing them out in a spreading pattern. 9 charges total, each filled with 300 pounds of Torpex explosive, more powerful than standard TNT. The charges sank, reached their preset depths, and detonated. The sea erupted. Geysers rose 50 feet, then collapsed in avalanches of white water. The shock waves propagated through the ocean, bouncing off the surface, the bottom, the submarine's hull. Inside Borie, the crew felt the detonations as hammer blows transmitted through the keel. Shevlin lost contact in the turbulence. Standard procedure. Hutchins turned Borie in a wide arc and came back, slower this time, listening. After 2 minutes, Shevlin called, contact bearing 042, range 1,000 yards. Depth shoaling, estimate 100 feet. The U-boat was rising. Either the charges had damaged her, cracked hull plates, flooded ballast tanks, disabled diving planes, or the captain had decided to fight on the surface. Hutchins ordered the guns to stand by. At 0315, the U-boat broached, bow first, then the conning tower, water streaming from the vents. She wallowed in the trough between 2 waves, propellers threshing. In the darkness, she was barely visible. A black shape, low in the water, maybe 400 yards away. Hutchins ordered full ahead and turned to ram. Borie's 4-inch guns opened fire. The first rounds missed, the range was changing too fast, the seas too high for accurate fire control solutions. The third round hit the conning tower, a flash of orange sparks. The U-boat's deck gun, an 8.8 centimeter weapon, tried to train on Borie but could not depress enough at close range. The Flakvierling quad 20mm mount aft of the conning tower opened fire, tracer rounds arcing toward Borie's bridge. Borie's 20mm Oerlikons returned fire. Tracer against tracer, crisscrossing in the dark. The U-boat's gunners were exposed on the conning tower platform. No armor, no cover. Oerlikon rounds, 20mm high-explosive incendiary shells, tore into the platform. Men fell. Hutchins held course. Range, 300 yards. 200. 100. At 0318, Borie's bow struck U-405's forward hull at an oblique angle. The impact rang through both ships. Borie's bow rode up, lifted by the collision and the swell, and came down hard on the U-boat's foredeck, just aft of the forward torpedo loading hatch. The destroyer's keel rested on the submarine's pressure hull. The 2 ships were locked together in a V, held by the sea, the waves crashing over both. For several minutes, the crews stared at each other across a gap of 10 to 20 feet. It was surreal, impossible. A destroyer and a submarine locked hull to hull, pitching in a gale. Borie's 4-inch guns could not depress far enough to hit the U-boat. The submarine's deck gun could not elevate enough to hit Borie. The angle was all wrong for both. What followed was something out of the 19th century, not the 20th. 0320 hours. The 2 ships ground together, held by wave action and the weight of Borie's bow pressing down on U-405's forward hull. Each swell lifted both vessels, then dropped them into the trough with a crash that shook every frame and rivet. The noise was terrible. Steel on steel, the shriek of tearing metal, the roar of the sea, the crack of small arms fire. On Borie's foredeck, crewmen grabbed whatever weapons they had. Thompson submachine guns, M1903 Springfield rifles, 45 caliber pistols, hand grenades. Hutchins had drilled them on this close-quarters combat, boarding actions, situations the Navy hadn't seriously considered since the age of sail. Now the drill was real. The U-boat's deck was 10 feet below and 15 feet away, close enough to throw a rope. German crewmen struggled out of the conning tower hatch, trying to man the 20mm flak Vierling. Borie's gunners shot them down. A torpedoman second class threw a hand grenade. It bounced off the conning tower and exploded in the water. Another grenade landed on the U-boat's deck, near the base of the tower, and detonated. Shrapnel rang off the steel plating. Men on both sides fired rifles and submachine guns. Muzzle flashes lit the scene in stuttering freeze frames. A German sailor appeared at the forward hatch, trying to pass up ammunition. A Springfield round hit him in the chest and he fell back inside. Another sailor tried to work the deck gun, swinging it toward Borie's bridge. Oerlikon fire cut him down before he could load a shell. The action reports, filed weeks later, used clinical language. Small arms fire exchanged at close range. Enemy personnel observed on deck and conning tower, engaged with rifles, submachine guns, and grenades. Resistance ceased after approximately 10 minutes. But the men who were there remembered it differently. Seaman First Class Raymond Choate later recalled, "We were on her deck. I could see their faces. It was like the movies, except the movies don't show you the noise and the smell and the cold." Gunner's mate Third Class Walter Kurz said, "I threw 4 grenades. 1 bounced off, 2 landed on the deck, 1 went down the hatch. I don't know if they went off. Everything was happening at once." Lieutenant Junior Grade Philip L. Porter, Borie's executive officer, moved along the deck coordinating fire. He carried a .45 pistol and later reported emptying 2 magazines at the conning tower. Their gunners kept trying to man the 20mm. "We kept shooting them. It went on and on." The U-boat's captain, Captain Lieutenant Hopman, appeared briefly at the top of the conning tower. He was shouting orders, impossible to hear over the wind and gunfire, trying to organize his crew. A burst of Thompson fire forced him back below. He did not reappear. Borie's crew had the advantage. They were firing from stable positions, protected by splinter shields and deck fittings. The U-boat's crew were exposed, climbing out of a narrow hatch into a storm of bullets. But the submarine's hull was tough. Borie's gunners poured small arms fire into the conning tower, the deck, the vents, and the U-boat stayed afloat. The pressure hull, designed to withstand depth-charge shock waves, was proof against rifle bullets. Only the grenades did real damage, blowing open deck plates and vents. The U-boat's diesel engines were still running. The crew could hear them. A deep rumble transmitted through the hulls where they touched. Exhaust smoke poured from the vents. The propellers turned, churning the water between the 2 ships. Fuel oil leaked from ruptured bunkers, spreading a rainbow sheen across the waves. Then, at approximately 0325, a wave larger than the rest lifted Borie's stern and dropped her bow. The destroyer's keel scraped along the submarine's deck, tearing open vents and hatches, then slid sideways. The 2 ships separated. Suddenly, violently, each rolling in opposite directions. Hutchins ordered hard right rudder and full ahead. Borie pulled clear, her bow gouged and scraped, but still intact. Sonar regained contact. U-405 on the surface, dead in the water, 200 yards off the port beam. Hutchins ordered depth charges. 0330 hours. Borie circled the crippled U-boat at a range of 300 yards. The submarine was still afloat but low in the water, listing to port, her conning tower dark. No gunfire came from her deck. The diesel engines had stopped. She wallowed in the troughs, rising and falling with the swells, clearly unable to maneuver. Hutchins ordered shallow-set depth charges prepared. The charges were rolled to the stern racks and fused for 25 feet, barely below the surface, close enough to damage a floating target without wasting the explosion deep underwater. The K-gun crews loaded charges and set their throwers to minimum range. At 0335, Borie made a slow pass along U-405's port side, maintaining a distance of 150 yards. The stern racks released 2 charges. The K-guns fired 2 more. The 4 charges hit the water, sank, and detonated. The explosions were close. Geysers rose alongside the submarine's hull, shock waves visible as white rings spreading across the black water. The U-boat shuddered. Her bow dipped. More oil poured from her vents. Men appeared on the conning tower, 3, then 5, then more, climbing out waving white cloth. Hutchins ordered ceasefire. Borie's crew prepared to take prisoners. Lines were rigged, cargo nets deployed, life rings thrown into the water. The seas were running too high for a boat launch, but men in the water could be pulled aboard if they could reach the nets. Hutchins brought Borie alongside, engines at dead slow, trying to maintain position in the gale. Then the lookouts reported a new contact. Star shells bursting 2,000 yards to the west. Green flares. A second U-boat, signaling, or possibly attacking. There were reports of torpedo wakes, unconfirmed, lost in the confusion of waves and darkness. Hutchins had no choice. He could not remain stopped with another U-boat in the area. He ordered full ahead and pulled away from U-405, abandoning the rescue attempt. At 0350, U-405's bow rose high, nearly vertical. The stern sank first, propellers disappearing, then the pressure hull, then the conning tower. The last thing visible was the periscope mast, sliding down into the black water. Time of sinking, 0357, November 1st, 1943. Position, approximately 49 degrees north, 31 degrees west. No survivors were recovered. 49 men, Captain Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann, his officers, his crew, went down with the hull. Some may have been killed during the firefight. Some may have died in the flooding compartments after the ramming. The rest drowned in the Atlantic in a Force 9 gale, in water cold enough to kill in minutes. Borie's crew stood at the rail and watched the U-boat disappear. There was no cheering.
No celebration.
Just silence, and the wind, and the sea. Hutchins ordered a signal to card. U-boat destroyed, position 49 north, 31 west. Borie heavily damaged. Require assistance. The damage was severe. The collision had bent Borie's bow upward, springing hull plates and opening seams forward. Water flooded the forward compartments, paint locker, anchor chain locker, forward crew berthing. Pumps could not keep ahead of the inflow. The bow was riding high, but the weight of water in the forward spaces was pulling the stern down. The port propeller shaft was vibrating badly, throwing off balance, threatening to tear loose from its bearings. Engineering reported the main engines were running, but fuel oil was leaking from ruptured tanks into the bilges. Electrical systems in the forward part of the ship were shorted out. Steering was possible but stiff. The rudder post had been jarred in the collision. Speed was reduced to 15 knots, maybe less. Hutchins assessed the situation. Borie was afloat, but barely. In calm seas, she might have limped back to port. In a Force 9 gale, 300 miles from the nearest land, she was in mortal danger. Every wave that hit the bow drove more water into the hull. Every hour that passed reduced the ship's buoyancy. If the flooding could not be stopped, Borie would founder. Hutchins ordered damage control parties forward. Men struggled through waist-deep water, bracing shoring timbers against bulkheads, stuffing mattresses and hammocks into leaks, rigging pumps. The water kept rising. By 0430, it was clear that Borie was losing the fight. 0430 hours, November 1st. Borie's damage control parties worked in conditions that defy doctrine. The forward compartments were flooded to the overhead in some spaces, waist-deep in others. The cold was brutal, seawater at 12 degrees Celsius, air temperature barely higher, wind chill far below freezing. Men working in the flooded spaces were soaked within minutes, shivering violently within 30. In the engineering spaces aft, Chief Machinist's mate Robert H. Schaefer kept the main engines running, but the situation was deteriorating. Fuel oil, leaking from ruptured forward tanks, had contaminated the bilges. The mixture of seawater, fuel, and oil fouled the bilge pumps, clogging strainers and reducing flow. Carbon dioxide levels rose as the fuel oil evaporated in the confined spaces. Men working below had to rotate topside every 20 minutes to avoid passing out. The port propeller shaft was the biggest worry. The collision had jarred it in its bearings, throwing the alignment off by fractions of an inch, enough to cause severe vibration at any speed above 10 knots. The vibration transmitted through the hull, shaking the entire stern structure, loosening rivets, cracking welds. If the shaft tore loose, it could rip open the hull and sink the ship in minutes. Schaefer reduced speed on the port engine, trying to minimize the vibration. Borie's speed dropped to 12 knots, then 10. Even at that crawl, the shaft howled and shook. Engineering recommended securing the port engine entirely, but that would leave Borie with only one propeller, barely enough to maintain steerage in the gale. On the bridge, Hutchins faced the reality. His ship was dying. Barring a miracle, calm seas, immediate towing assistance, a dry dock that could materialize in the middle of the Atlantic, Borie was not going to make port. At 0500 hours, he radioed card, hull integrity failing, flooding uncontrollable, estimate 6 to 8 hours maximum before loss of buoyancy. Request immediate assistance. Card's response was bleak. The carrier was grounded by weather, flight operations impossible in 40-knot winds and 30-foot seas. The other destroyers in Task Group 21.14, Borie and Goff, were racing to Borie's position, but they were 60 miles away, fighting the same storm, making maybe 15 knots. Estimated time of arrival, 0800 hours, best case. Maybe later. Hutchins did the math. 6 hours until the ship sank. 3 hours until help arrived. That left 3 hours to stabilize the flooding, if it could be stabilized at all. It could not. By 0600, the forward compartments were completely flooded. The bow was riding higher as the trapped air pockets kept it buoyant, but the weight of water amidships was pulling the ship down by the stern. The main deck forward was awash with every wave. Green water poured through vents and hatches, cascading into spaces that were supposed to be dry. Topside, ice was forming on the rails, guns, and rigging. Spray froze on contact with the metal. Men working on deck were encased in ice. Jackets stiff, gloves frozen to handholds, faces crusted with salt and frost. Hypothermia was setting in. Exhaustion was universal. At 0630, the forward bulkhead of the No. 2 fire room gave way. The compartment flooded in seconds, drowning the forward boiler. The rush of cold seawater hitting the hot boiler generated a geyser of steam that shot up through the vents, scalding 2 men on deck. The ship lurched as the weight shifted aft. Speed dropped to 6 knots. Hutchins knew it was over. Borie could not be saved. The question now was whether the crew could be saved. He radioed Card again. Preparing to abandon ship. Request Borie and Goff expedite arrival. Weather conditions extreme. Estimate 50% casualties during transfer. That was optimistic. In 40-knot winds, 30-foot seas, and 12-degree water, survival time for a man in the ocean was measured in minutes, not hours. Even with rescue ships standing by, the loss rate would be catastrophic. But there was no choice. Staying aboard meant going down with the ship. Abandoning ship meant a chance, small but real, of survival. At 0700 hours, Hutchins ordered the crew to prepare to abandon. Life jackets were issued, heavy kapok vests, stiff and cumbersome, but they would keep a man afloat, at least for a while. Lifelines were rigged along the rails. Cargo nets were deployed over the side for men to climb down. The few life rafts aboard, small balsa floats, each holding 8 to 10 men, were cut loose and dropped into the sea. The crew assembled on the main deck, grouped by division, waiting for the order. Some were injured, broken bones from the collision, burns from the boiler explosion, cuts and bruises from being thrown around in the storm. All were exhausted, cold, soaked. They stood in silence, holding the rails, watching the horizon for Borie and Goff. At 0730, the 2 destroyers appeared through the murk, gray shapes barely visible against the gray sea and gray sky. It was time. 0730 hours. USS Borie and USS Goff closed on Borie from opposite sides, trying to form a lee where the seas might be less violent. It was a nearly impossible evolution. The wind was blowing 40 to 50 knots, gusting higher. Seas ran 30 to 35 feet, breaking over the destroyer's forecastles. Visibility was a few hundred yards in the spray and foam. Borie's captain, Lieutenant Commander Donald B. Campbell, brought his ship alongside Borie at a distance of 50 feet, then 30, then closer. Too close and the two ships would collide. Too far and men jumping or swimming would be swept away. He held position using constant rudder and engine adjustments, fighting the sea for every foot. On Borie's deck, Hutchins gave the order, "Abandon ship." The first group of men went over the side. Some climbed down cargo nets, clinging to the netting as waves crashed over them. Some jumped directly into the water, life jackets holding them afloat, arms and legs thrashing. The sea was chaos, white water everywhere, the roar of the wind drowning out shouts and screams. Borie's crew threw lines and life rings. Men in the water grabbed them or tried to. Cold water saps strength instantly. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. Muscles seize. Coordination fails. Some men caught the lines and were hauled aboard. Others missed, drifted away, disappeared in the troughs between swells. The transfer took hours. Groups of 10 or 20 men went over at a time. Then Borie pulled away to recover those in the water, then closed again for the next group. Borie was settling deeper. Her main deck was now awash even between waves. The stern was low, the bow still high but tilted at a crazy angle. She looked like a wounded animal trying to stay on its feet. At 0900 hours, the forward bulkhead of the No. 1 fire room collapsed. The compartment flooded. The forward boiler, already cold, was submerged. Borie lurched again, bow rising even higher, stern sinking lower. Water poured through every opening, hatches, vents, scuttles, voids. On deck, the remaining crew fought to stay upright. Waves swept men off their feet. Some were washed overboard before they could jump. Others clung to stanchions and rails, waiting for their turn. Seaman First Class John C. Drury was one of the last off. He later recalled, "I was holding onto a lifeline, watching the bow come up and the stern go down, and I thought, she's going. She's really going." Then a wave hit and I was in the water. I don't remember jumping. I just remember being in the water, and it was so cold I couldn't breathe. Drury was pulled aboard Borie after 10 minutes in the water. He was hypothermic, barely conscious, but alive. Not everyone was as lucky. Fireman First Class Arthur P. Mullaney went over the side at 0830. He surfaced, waved, and started swimming toward Borie. Then a wave broke over him and he disappeared. His body was never recovered. Torpedoman Second Class Henry L. Roby jumped from Borie's stern at 0915. He missed the cargo net, hit the water hard, and went under. His life jacket brought him back up, but his right arm was broken. He could not swim. Goff's crew threw him a line. He tried to grab it with his left hand. Missed, tried again, caught it. They hauled him aboard, arm dangling, face gray with shock and cold. By 1000 hours, most of Borie's crew were off the ship. Borie had recovered approximately 110 men. Goff had recovered approximately 80. Another 15 were in the water, clinging to life rafts or wreckage, being pulled aboard as the destroyers maneuvered. On Borie, only a handful of men remained. Hutchins and his executive officer, Philip L. Porter, and a few volunteers who stayed behind to help with the final evacuations. They stood on the tilting deck, watching the sea rise toward them, waiting for the last men to clear. At 10:30 hours, the last man went over the side, gunner's mate Second Class Walter J. Krupa. He climbed down the cargo net, dropped into the water and swam to Borie. The net was cut loose and washed away. Hutchins looked at Porter. "Time to go." They climbed down to the main deck, now under 6 inches of water, and jumped together. The cold hit like a hammer. Hutchins surfaced, gasping, and struck out for Borie. Porter surfaced beside him. They swam side by side, life jackets keeping them afloat, arms and legs barely functional in the icy water. Borie's crew threw lines. Hutchins caught one, was pulled aboard, collapsed on deck. Porter caught another, was hauled up, lay beside him. They were both shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering, soaked and frozen. But they were alive. At 1100 hours, a count was taken. Borie had rescued approximately 120 men. Goff had rescued approximately 75. Total aboard the two destroyers, 195 officers and enlisted. Borie's complement had been approximately 222. That left 27 men unaccounted for. Some had been killed during the firefight with U-405. Some had drowned during the evacuation. Some had died of hypothermia in the water. Some had simply vanished, swept away, pulled under, gone. 27 men. 27 names added to the casualty lists, 27 telegrams to families, 27 graves marked lost at sea. The survivors huddled in the destroyer's compartments, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee, slowly warming. Many were injured. Many were in shock. All were exhausted. They had survived the fight with U-405. They had survived the sinking of their ship. They had survived the Atlantic in a gale. They were the lucky ones. 1100 hours, November 1st, 1943. Borie floated alone, abandoned, dying. Her bow pointed skyward at a 45-degree angle. Her stern was under water, propellers and rudder submerged. Waves broke over her midships, pouring through open hatches and vents. She rolled slowly in the swells, a steel corpse waiting for the final blow. Borie and Goff stood off at 500 yards, engines idling, riding the seas. On Borie's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Campbell watched Borie through binoculars. The destroyer was clearly done. No power, no crew, flooding uncontrolled. She could not be towed. The sea was too rough and her hull too damaged. She could not be salvaged. The nearest port was 300 miles away and she would sink long before reaching it. But she also could not be left afloat. A derelict destroyer drifting in a known patrol area could provide intelligence to the enemy if boarded. Codebooks, radar equipment, sonar manuals, radio gear, classified material that could compromise Allied operations. The standard procedure was clear. Scuttle the wreck, ensure it sank, deny it to the enemy. At 11:15 hours, Campbell radioed Hutchins, who was recovering aboard Borie, permission to sink Borie. Hutchins, wrapped in blankets, shivering, voice hoarse, replied, "Permission granted. Make it quick." Campbell ordered Borie to close within 300 yards. The forward 4-inch gun trained on Borie's waterline. The gun captain, Chief Gunner's Mate Harold P. Sullivan, laid the sight, corrected for the rolling deck and moving target, and fired. The first round hit Borie's hull just above the waterline, amidships. The shell, a 55-pound armor-piercing projectile, punched through the thin hull plating and exploded inside. A gout of smoke and steam erupted from the hole. Water poured in. Sullivan fired again. The second round hit forward, near the collapsed No. 2 fire room. Another hole. Another rush of water. The third round hit aft, near the depth charge racks. By now, all the charges had been expended or jettisoned, so there was no secondary explosion. Just another hole, another wound in the dying ship. Borie settled lower. The water level rose over the main deck. The bow, still high, began to tilt further. The stern, already submerged, dragged deeper. At 11:30 hours, Borie ceased fire. 3 shells had done the job. Campbell ordered depth charges prepared. Borie maneuvered to pass along Borie's port side at close range. At 11:40, Borie's stern racks released 2 depth charges, fused for shallow detonation, 50 feet. The charges sank, detonated. The explosions raised geysers on either side of Borie's hull. The shock waves transmitted through the water, through the steel, through the flooding compartments. Hull plates buckled. Welds cracked. What remained of Borie's structural integrity collapsed. At 11:50 hours, the bow began to drop. Slowly at first, then faster. The stern rose as the bow sank, the entire hull tilting vertical. For a moment, Borie stood on her nose. A 214-meter-long destroyer balanced on end, propellers and rudder pointing at the sky, bow disappearing into the black water below. Then she slipped under. No explosión, no dramatic plunge. Just a smooth, swift descent into the Atlantic. The last thing visible was the starboard propeller, still turning slowly, driven by residual water pressure in the shafts. Then that too vanished. Time of sinking, 12:05 hours, November 1st, 1943. Position, 49 degrees north, 31 degrees west. The same position where U-405 had sunk 2 hours earlier. 2 ships, 1 American, 1 German, lay on the bottom. 76 men, 49 Germans, 27 Americans, lay with them, or somewhere in the surrounding sea, cold and dark and silent. On Barry's deck, Borie's survivors stood at the rail and watched the spot where their ship had gone down. The sea was empty now. No wreckage, no oil slick, nothing. Just waves and wind and the gray sky. Some men cried. Some stood silent. Some turned away and went below, unable to watch. Hutchins stood alone at the rail, staring at the water, face expressionless. He had commanded Borie for less than a year. He had brought her through convoy runs, U-boat hunts, Arctic gales, and finally a fight that no destroyer manual had ever described. He had lost 27 men and his ship. He had sunk a U-boat. He had survived. He did not know, in that moment, whether he had won or lost. At 12:30 hours, Barry and Goff turned west and increased speed, heading toward the rendezvous with Card. The survivors were distributed between the 2 destroyers. Crowded, uncomfortable, but safe. Medical personnel treated the injured. Broken bones splinted, burns bandaged, hypothermia cases warmed. Food was prepared: soup, bread, coffee. Men ate mechanically, silently. By nightfall on November 1st, the 2 destroyers rejoined Task Group 21.14. Card's aircraft were flying again, the weather having moderated slightly. The patrol continued. In 36 hours, Task Group 21.14 had destroyed 1 U-boat, U-405, and lost 1 destroyer, USS Borie. The tactical balance, 1-to-1. The strategic balance, irreplaceable trained U-boat crews versus a replaceable aging destroyer. The human balance, 76 lives lost, 195 saved. The Atlantic, indifferent, rolled on. Washington, D.C. December 1943. In a nondescript office building on Constitution Avenue, a team of naval analysts reviewed the action reports from Task Group 21.14. The reports were detailed: times, positions, weather, ammunition expenditures, casualties. The facts were clear. The interpretation was more complex. U-405, a Type 7C U-boat, had been destroyed, confirmed by wreckage, oil slicks, and the absence of any subsequent radio transmissions from the boat. Captain Lieutenant Hopman and 49 crew, killed in action. 1 German submarine removed from the Atlantic theater. 1 less threat to Allied shipping. USS Borie, a Clemson-class destroyer, had been lost, sunk after sustaining damage in combat and heavy weather. Lieutenant Commander Charles H. Hutchins and 27 crew, missing, presumed dead. 1 American warship removed from the Atlantic fleet. 1 less escort for the convoys. The analysis went deeper. Borie was 24 years old, built in the post-World War I construction surge, already obsolete by 1943 standards. Her replacement, if she were replaced at all, would be a Fletcher-class destroyer. Faster, better armed, more capable in every measurable way. The loss of Borie freed up crew billets for assignment to newer ships. U-405 was less than 2 years old, built in 1941, one of the most effective submarine designs ever produced. Her replacement, if Germany could replace her, would take 6 months to build and another 6 months to work up a trained crew. By mid-1944, the strategic calculus showed that Germany could not replace losses at the rate they were occurring. Every Type 7C lost in late 1943 was a U-boat that would not be available for the invasion of France in mid-1944. From that cold, strategic perspective, the loss of Borie was acceptable. But the Navy did not make decisions based solely on strategic calculus. Men mattered. Actions mattered. Courage mattered. On December 15, 1943, the Navy Department announced that Lieutenant Commander Charles H. Hutchins, USNR, was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor posthumously. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in action against enemy submarine forces. Commanding officer of USS Borie, Lieutenant Commander Hutchins displayed outstanding courage and determination in pressing home a successful attack which resulted in the destruction of a German submarine. His aggressive leadership and devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." On the same date, the entire crew of USS Borie was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, only the second time a destroyer had received the award, following USS O'Bannon earlier that year. The citation recognized extraordinary heroism in action against enemy submarine forces in the North Atlantic. Individual decorations followed. Executive Officer Philip L. Porter received the Navy Cross. Chief Machinist Mate Robert H. Schaefer received the Silver Star for keeping the engines running under impossible conditions. Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Walter J. Kurz received the Bronze Star for heroism during the close quarters firefight. 19 other crew members received commendations. The decorations were presented in ceremonies over the following months. For the survivors, the ceremonies were bittersweet. They wore their medals with pride but also with the weight of memory. The faces of the men who did not return, the sound of the sea closing over Borie's hull, the cold and the dark and the exhaustion. Hutchins' Navy Cross was presented to his widow in a private ceremony in Boston. She accepted it with dignity, but later said, "I didn't want a medal. I wanted my husband." The tactical lessons from Borie's action were studied and disseminated. The ramming attack, though successful, was not recommended for general use. The risk to the attacking ship was too high. The close quarters firefight was noted as an anomaly, unlikely to recur, but proving the value of small arms training even for destroyer crews. The loss of the ship due to structural damage in heavy seas was analyzed by naval architects, who recommended hull reinforcement for older destroyers still in service. By mid-1944, most of the surviving Clemson-class destroyers had been withdrawn from frontline service and reassigned to training duties, convoy escort in safer waters, or scrapped. Borie's sister ships, Barry and Gough among them, continued in service but were not sent into the most contested patrol areas. The strategic lesson was simpler. Escort carriers and destroyer escorts, operating as hunter-killer groups, were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1943, the Allies built ships faster than Germany could sink them and sank U-boats faster than Germany could replace them. By 1944, the equation had shifted decisively. The Atlantic was an Allied sea. U-405's loss was recorded in the Kriegsmarine's rolls. Captain Lieutenant Hopman was posthumously promoted to Korvettenkapitän. His crew were listed as killed in action, North Atlantic in the records of the Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot. U-405 was noted as failed to return from patrol, presumed lost with all hands. She was one of 237 U-boats lost in 1943, a rate that would only increase in 1944. In the final accounting, Borie's fight with U-405 was tactically significant, strategically minor, and humanly profound. 2 ships destroyed, 76 men killed. One night in November, in the middle of the Atlantic, in a gale, 2 crews fought to the end. History recorded it as a footnote. The survivors remembered it as everything. 49 degrees north, 31 degrees west. The Atlantic rolls over the spot where Borie and U-405 lie, 2,000 meters down, in perpetual darkness, in water so cold it preserves steel and flesh alike. The wrecks have never been found. No dive, no sonar scan, no memorial plaque marks the place. Just coordinates on a chart and the memory of those who were there. The Battle of the Atlantic continued for another year and a half after Borie sank. The pattern that emerged in late 1943, aggressive Allied hunter-killer groups, overwhelming air cover, technological superiority in radar and sonar, became dominant in 1944. Germany launched new U-boat types. The Type 21, faster and more capable than the Type 7, and the Type 23, a small coastal boat. But they came too late and in too few numbers. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the Kriegsmarine had lost 783 U-boats and approximately 32,000 men, three-quarters of all U-boat personnel who served. The Allies lost 3,500 merchant ships and 75,000 merchant sailors, along with dozens of warships and thousands of naval personnel. The cost was staggering. But the convoys got through. The supplies reached Britain. The armies were fed, equipped, and transported. The Battle of the Atlantic was won. Borie's contribution to that victory was small but real. In the 6 months she operated with Task Group 21.14, the group destroyed 8 U-boats and damaged or harassed dozens more. The boats that were sunk did not torpedo convoys. The boats that were damaged returned to base and spent weeks in repair, out of action. The boats that were harassed expended fuel and torpedoes defensively, reducing their effectiveness. Every U-boat destroyed or driven off was one less threat to the supply lines. Every convoy that reached port was tonnage added to the Allied advantage. Every month that passed in late 1943 and early 1944 brought the invasion of Europe closer. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Atlantic was secure. German U-boats still operated, still sank ships, but they could no longer interdict the flow of men and material across the ocean. Borie's crew, the survivors, were reassigned after their recovery. Hutchins' executive officer, Philip L. Porter, went on to command his own destroyer, USS Taylor, in the Pacific. He survived the war, retired as a commander, and lived until 1989. Chief Machinist Mate Robert H. Schaefer served on 2 more ships, received a commission as an ensign in 1944, and retired as a lieutenant commander in 1960. Gunner's Mate Walter J. Kurz returned to civilian life in 1945, worked as a machinist in Cleveland, and rarely spoke of the war. He died in 1995. The survivors held a reunion in 1953, 10 years after the sinking. 70 men attended. They toured a museum, looked at photos of Borie, shared stories. The tone was subdued. No one wanted to romanticize what had happened. They remembered the cold, the fear, the faces of the men who did not come back. They remembered doing their jobs under impossible conditions and surviving through luck as much as skill. At the reunion, someone asked Philip L. Porter what he thought Borie's fight had meant. He considered the question for a long time before answering. It meant we did what we were trained to do. We fought the ship. We stayed together. We got most of the crew off. If there's a lesson, it's that. You train, you prepare, you trust your shipmates. When it all goes wrong, that's what saves you. In 1963, 20 years after the sinking, the survivors commissioned a memorial plaque. It was installed at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C., and lists the names of the 27 men who died with Borie: Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward L. Brown, Gunner's Mate First Class Charles S. Gray, Fireman First Class Arthur P. Mullaney, and 24 others. The plaque includes the date, November 1, 1943, and the position, 49 North 31 West, and the simple inscription: They gave their lives in defense of freedom. Captain Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann and the crew of U-405 are remembered in Germany at the U-Boat Memorial in Moltenort, near Kiel. The memorial lists the names of all 32,000 German submariners who died in World War II. Hauptmann's name is there, along with those of his 48 crew. They are remembered not as villains or heroes but as men who served, fought, and died in a war that consumed millions. War memorials exist to remind the living that the dead were real. They had names, faces, families, futures. They were not statistics or strategic assets. They were human beings who found themselves in circumstances beyond their control and did what they believed was right or necessary, or simply what they were ordered to do. The Atlantic, indifferent to human conflict, continues to roll. The convoys that once crossed it in fear now cross in peace. The hunter-killer groups are gone. The U-boats are rust and memory. The battle is history. But the lessons endure. That courage is not the absence of fear but the will to act despite it. That duty is not glorious but necessary. That war is not an adventure but a tragedy, measured in names on plaques and coordinates on charts. Borie and U-405 fought each other to mutual destruction. They lie together now, in the cold and the dark, 2,000 meters down. The sea has claimed them. History has recorded them. Memory preserves them. We owe them that much. What is your perspective on this part of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every memory and reflection helps keep the past alive.